There could be big trouble ahead for the United States, and it has to do with the dollar and oil. The combined currency reserves in all countries around the world amount to 6.9 trillion, and about 65% of that is in dollars. This amounts to about 4.485 trillion US dollars owned by other countries. The dollar is by far the most common currency reserve worldwide, and countries could do serious damage to the US economy by dumping dollars en masse. There's also a current account balance deficit in the US of about 747 billion. This is also known as the trade deficit. What usually happens when a country runs a trade deficit is that their currency weakens. This happens because when a country like the US runs a trade deficit, dollars are now all over the place. In fact, there are about 747 billion more dollars around the world than there should be right now. And when you have more dollars, but the amount of goods doesn't change, you get inflation. Now, 747 billion is not a big deal. If the entire account balance in the US was corrected instantaneously, the resulting inflation would reduce the value of US household assets by about 2%. So in real GDP terms, it would result in a 2% economic contraction. Considering the US real GDP growth has been around 1.5% to 3% a year anyway, this hit could easily be absorbed in 1 year. But the situation is worse than that, much worse. This is because the US has a massive current account deficit, but still continues to run them. Now, why would this be? Shouldn't countries running trade deficits be pressured by inflation to begin running surpluses? Why, yes, they should, unless that country is cheating. See, the US continues to run deficits because dollars are more than just US currency. You see, for the longest time, major oil-producing nations only accepted dollars. This allowed the U.S. to run trade deficits and not experience the inflation because the trade deficits would be offset by any increase in demand for oil. Part of the reason the U.S. is so much wealthier than Europe is because it has had this year-in, year-out edge. And basically Europe and the rest of the world was exporting free goodies to the U.S. so they could get their precious dollars they needed to get the oil. During the 1973 Saudi oil embargo, for example, the U.S. and the U.K. got the Sauds to accept the Petro Dollar, meaning that they would only accept US dollars when selling their oil. In November of 2000, Saddam switched from only accepting dollars to only accepting euros, and Iraq has the fourth largest amount of proven oil reserves. So invading Iraq halted the advance of the petro-euro. And because the demand for oil is inelastic, Bush is taking his sweet time rebuilding Iraq's oil production facilities, but that's more of a side issue that I go into more detail in the video that this is a response to. And now that Iran and Venezuela are making some grumblings that they may switch currencies, they're starting to be targeted as bad guys as well. I honestly believe Chavez and Ahmadinejad are bad actors, but then again, so are Kim Jong-il and Robert Mugabe. But they're not being targeted in the same way because they don't have oil. Now, to show the danger, I'm going to outline my Petro Dollar collapse scenario, and this is my scenario. Take it or leave it. Step 1. Iran, Venezuela, and Russia began selling their oil in euros. Not all at once, but once one of those three countries starts, the other two will follow suit pretty quickly. Venezuela and Iran can be dealt with militarily by cooking up some reason to go to war like with Iraq, but Russia cannot, and neither can Iran if they get nukes. Step 2, once these countries go off the petrodollar, smaller financial institutions, smaller banks from smaller countries, dump their dollar reserves because they don't need them to get oil anymore. Larger countries, however, cannot. And the reason larger countries can't dump their dollars en masse is because it would ruin the U.S. economy, which buys all their goods. For example, China can't dump their dollars because it would be murder-suicide. In fact, China and Japan could be the bulwarks which hold out and save America. Smaller countries can dump their dollars and gain the benefit of having a strong reserve currency without ruining the U.S. economy, which they are dependent on for a market. China, however, cannot, because if they dump their dollars, they will ruin the U.S. economy that they are dependent on. The countries I see dumping dollars are tiny ones, plus these three: Iran, Turkey, and Russia. Smaller countries will as well, but those are the big three I see dumping. Step 3. Having faced a huge petrodollar fallout and a pretty big currency dump, the U.S. is really feeling it in terms of inflation. 15% annually would be a good ballpark estimate at this point. And these steps overlapped to some degree. Now, But now comes the slow boil, because whenever a single bank dumps the dollar has just become weaker, which entices other banks to dump their dollars as well. It's a domino effect, and I suspect it would take decades to fully manifest. Also keep in mind that as countries are dumping their dollars, financial institutions are going to be less willing to issue bonds to the federal government, which is already in deep shit in terms of debt. So we'll see higher interest rates on the government or national debt as well, which is currently at about 9.3 trillion. To put that in perspective, the annual GDP of the US is 13.86 trillion. But all this happens only if Iran, Venezuela, and Russia tip first. They are the first dominoes, and so expect to see those three countries in the news for a while. Given this situation, I would endorse Ron Paul, as I did in the first video, but the choice in presidents is now between John McCain and Barack Obama, given that this Larry Sinclair thing failed the polygraph. John McCain would be like George Bush and simply keep trying to uphold the petrodollar without trying to correct America itself by gradually moving the U.S. to a more normal stance. He'd just try to hold on. He'd be Bush III. Ron Paul would have tried to make the necessary cuts in welfare, which we simply can't afford. McCain would maintain the spending level, whereas Obama is making these speeches about bringing back hope to America. And by that, he means massive increase in welfare outlays. The truth of the matter is that America is in emergency mode. We are one domino away from a multi-decadal recession and depression, and this is not the time to be talking about universal health care or student loans or upping Social Security. Given the choice between Hope-a-dope Obama and Bush III McCain, I endorse McCain as the lesser of two evils. Perhaps he can hold on long enough and the situation can become clear to the public during his administration, and another Ron Paul-esque Luddite can emerge. But if Obama wins, we're fucked.